The shape under the street lamp wasn't moving. At first he thought it was trash, a frozen plastic bag caught against the curb, but then he saw the ears. Small, triangular, tufted at the tips. David slowed his truck, squinting through the windshield as snow swirled in the headlights. The cold snap had hit hard that week, the kind of cold that turned breath to ice and made metal burn to touch. He'd been driving this route home from the factory for 11 years, and he'd never seen anything like this. He pulled over, engine idling, and stepped out into the wind. The cold hit him immediately, sharp enough to sting his eyes. He pulled his coat tighter and walked toward the lamppost, boots crunching through the thin crust of ice. As he got closer, the shape came into focus. Not a bag, not a kitten, either, though that's what he'd almost convinced himself it was. The coat was spotted, tawny and cream, with dark rosettes across the back. The paws were oversized, disproportionate to the small body, and those ears, pointed, furred with black tufts that caught the lamplight like tiny flames. A bobcat, a kitten, alone, frozen. David crouched slowly, his knees protesting in the cold. The animal didn't move. Its eyes were half closed, frost clinging to the fur around its muzzle. One tiny paw was tucked beneath its chest, the other stretched out as if it had been walking, and simply stopped. He pulled off his glove and held his hand near its side. A faint rise, a fall, barely there, still breathing. "Jesus," he whispered. He didn't think, he didn't call anyone, he just moved. Unzipping his coat, he scooped the kitten up with both hands, light, impossibly light, and tucked it against his chest. The fur was stiff with cold, the body limp as cloth. He zipped the coat back up, trapping what little warmth he had left, and hurried back to the truck. The drive home was a blur of white and wind. He kept one hand on the wheel, the other pressed against the small shape inside his coat, trying to feel for movement, for breath, for anything. The heater roared, but the cold had already seeped too deep. He could feel it in the stillness of the animal's body, in the way it didn't stir even as the truck bounced over potholes. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on, stay with me." Inside the house, David moved fast. He cleared the kitchen table with one sweep of his arm. Mail, keys, a forgotten coffee cup, all clattered to the floor. He grabbed towels from the bathroom, his heating pad from the bedroom closet, a cardboard box he'd been meaning to throw out. His hands shook as he lined the box with the towels, plugged in the heating pad, set it to low. He laid the bobcat down gently, positioning it on its side so he could see its ribs rise and fall. They did, barely, slow and shallow, like the breath of something already halfway gone. David knelt beside the box, his own breath coming hard now, adrenaline catching up. He'd pulled a drowning kid out of a pond once, years ago, before he had grey in his beard. He remembered that same helpless urgency, the need to do something, even when you didn't know what. He ran warm water over another towel, wrung it out, and began to gently press it against the kitten's paws, its ears, the places where frostbite would have set in first. The fur was matted, clumped with ice. He worked slowly, carefully, warming one section at a time. The bobcat didn't wake, didn't flinch, just lay there, impossibly small, impossibly fragile. "You're not dying tonight," David said quietly. "Not here, not like this." He stayed there for hours, changing towels, adjusting the heating pad, watching the shallow rise and fall of the kitten's side, waiting for it to deepen, to steady. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. Then 1, then 2. His back ached. His knees were numb, but he didn't move. At some point, he heard the soft padding of paws behind him. David turned. Milo stood in the hallway doorway, a grey tabby with white socks and a crooked left ear from a fight years ago. He was 12 years old, arthritic, and deeply suspicious of anything that disrupted his routine. Right now, he was staring at the box on the floor with his tail low, ears swiveled forward. David froze. He'd forgotten about Milo entirely. "Hey buddy," he said softly. "It's okay, just stay back, all right." But Milo didn't stay back. He stepped forward slowly, nose twitching, body low to the ground. David held his breath. Bobcats were predators, even baby ones, and Milo was old, slow, prey-sized. This could go very wrong, very fast. Milo reached the edge of the box, sniffed the air, then leaned in, whiskers brushing the edge of the towel. The bobcat didn't stir, and then, without hesitation, without fear, Milo stepped into the box, circled once, and curled his body around the kitten's back. David's throat tightened. Milo began to groom the bobcat's frozen ears, slow, deliberate licks, the same way he groomed himself every morning. His purr started low, a rattling hum that filled the quiet kitchen. David didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched as his housecat, his cranky, territorial, 12-year-old tabby, adopted a wild predator without a moment's doubt. The bobcat's breathing deepened, just a little, just enough. David exhaled. One night, he whispered to himself, just one night. Then I'll find someone who knows what to do. But as Milo settled deeper into the box, his chin resting on the bobcat's head, David felt something shift, something quiet, something he couldn't name yet. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, two hearts beat steadier than before. David woke to silence, not the kind of silence that meant peace, the kind that meant something had changed. He'd fallen asleep in the armchair beside the kitchen table, neck stiff, one arm dangling toward the box on the floor. He sat up fast, heart kicking against his ribs. The box was still there, but it wasn't empty. Milo was curled tight around the bobcat, his body a perfect crescent. The kitten's head rested against Milo's chest, tiny paws tucked beneath its chin. Both were breathing, slow, steady, alive. David let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. The bobcat's eyes were still closed, but its ears twitched when Milo shifted. Its coat had thawed overnight, the spotted fur now soft and clean, where Milo had groomed it. The kitten looked stronger, real, no longer the half-frozen scrap he'd pulled from the street. David reached for his phone. He needed to call someone, a wildlife center, a vet, anyone who dealt with this kind of thing. But before he could dial, the bobcat stirred, a small sound, half whimper, half mew. Milo's eyes opened immediately. He lifted his head, sniffed the kitten's face, then resumed grooming, this time along the bobcat's neck, down its shoulder. The purring started again, deep and rhythmic. The bobcat's paw stretched out, flexed, then curled back in. David set the phone down. Over the next 3 days, David tried everything to separate them. He moved the bobcat to a larger crate in the spare room. Milo scratched at the door until David opened it, then climbed inside and refused to leave. He set up a heating lamp and soft bedding in the garage. Milo found a way through the cracked window and was waiting there by morning, curled around the kitten like he'd never left. He even tried keeping Milo in the bedroom at night, door closed. Milo yowled for 2 straight hours, a sound David hadn't heard from him in years, until David gave in and opened the door. The tabby bolted straight for the kitchen, back to the box, back to the bobcat. It wasn't aggression, it wasn't territorialism, it was something else, something David didn't have a word for. By the 4th day, the bobcat was eating, small amounts at first, wet food mashed with kitten formula, but eating. Its legs grew steadier. It began to explore the edges of the box, pawing at the towels, testing its weight, and Milo was always there. When the bobcat stumbled, Milo nudged it upright with his head. When it cried, Milo answered with a low trill. When it slept, Milo curled around it like a shield. David watched them from the doorway. One evening, coffee growing cold in his hand. The bobcat was play-biting, Milo's tail now, clumsy and uncoordinated. Milo tolerated it with the patience of a saint, occasionally batting the kitten's head with a soft paw, gentle corrections, the way a mother would. David pulled out his phone again. This time, he didn't call anyone. He just took a picture. Milo and the bobcat side by side, noses touching. He told himself it was temporary, that any day now, he'd make the call, find the right place, do the responsible thing. But as he looked at that photo, at the way Milo's eyes had softened, at the way the bobcat leaned into him, without fear, David realized something that made his chest tighten. He wasn't keeping the bobcat. Milo 3 weeks passed, like water through fingers. The bobcat grew fast, too fast. The oversized paws, the
that had seemed almost comical at first now matched the lengthening legs, the broadening chest. The spotted coat thickened, muscles rippling beneath the fur with every movement. What had once been a fragile kitten was becoming something powerful.
And Milo stayed right beside him. They played differently now. The Bobcat's pounces carried real weight, enough to bowl Milo over when he wasn't braced for it. His teeth, still kitten soft, were sharper than they'd been. His claws, even retracted, left faint marks on the hardwood when he ran. But Milo never flinched, never hissed, never retreated. He met every tackle with a headbutt, every rough bite with a gentle swat. When the Bobcat climbed the curtains, which he did, often, Milo sat below and chirped until the kitten came down. When the Bobcat stalked him from behind the couch, Milo pretended not to notice, then spun at the last second, touching noses before the pounce could land. David watched it all, with a knot growing tighter in his chest. He finally made the call on a Tuesday morning. The woman at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center was kind, professional. She asked the right questions: age, weight, behavior, diet. David answered them all, his voice steady, even as his hands weren't. "He's healthy enough for transitioning," she said. "We can start him on a soft release program. Get him used to outdoor enclosures, natural prey, independence. He's young enough that he'll adapt." "How long?" David asked. "A few weeks, maybe a month. Then we release him in a monitored area. It's the best outcome for him." David looked across the kitchen. Milo and the Bobcat were curled together in a patch of sunlight near the window, the tabby's tail draped over the wild kitten's back. "What about my cat?" David asked quietly. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Your cat will adjust," she said gently. "Animals form bonds, but they're resilient. He'll be okay." David hung up, but he didn't feel reassured. He built the enclosure himself. 10 feet by 12, chain link walls, a sloped roof to keep the rain out. Inside, he added climbing platforms, hollow logs, branches thick enough to hold weight. He even buried a shallow pool for water. The Bobcat loved it. He scaled the platforms in seconds, leapt from perch to perch, with precision that took David's breath away. He stalked moths through the grass, crouched low, hindquarters wiggling before the strike. He watched the tree line with eyes that had started to change, less round, more focused, more wild. But every evening, as the sun dropped behind the hills, the Bobcat pressed against the glass door that separated the enclosure from the house, and inside, Milo pressed back. David stood in the kitchen, watching them through the window. 2 faces, 1 glass wall between them. The Bobcat's paw lifted, touched the glass. Milo's paw mirrored it from the other side. David closed his eyes. He knew what he had to do. He'd always known, but knowing didn't make it hurt any less. Family spring came quietly that year. The snow melted, the trees budded, and the Bobcat, no longer a kitten, no longer fragile, stood at the edge of the forest with his ears pricked forward, watching the world that had always been waiting for him. David and Milo walked the enclosure one last time. The wildlife staff waited near the truck, giving them space, giving them this moment. The Bobcat approached slowly, head low, eyes locked on Milo. The tabby sat perfectly still, tail wrapped around his paws. When the Bobcat reached him, he pressed his forehead against Milo's, a long, deliberate touch. Milo closed his eyes, purred once, then stepped back. The Bobcat turned toward the open gate. He didn't run, he didn't hesitate. He just walked, smooth and certain, into the trees. David felt Milo stiffen in his arms, but the cat didn't cry out, didn't struggle. He just watched until the spotted coat disappeared into the green. The house felt wrong after that. Milo wandered the rooms like he'd lost something. He checked the enclosure every morning, nose pressed to the glass. At night he cried, soft questioning sounds that broke David's heart in new ways. David tried everything, new toys, extra treats, long hours on the couch with Milo curled in his lap. But the tabby's eyes stayed distant, fixed on the window, the door, the place where the Bobcat used to be. 2 weeks passed, then 3. David started to wonder if he'd made a mistake. He checked the trail camera on a Sunday morning, more out of habit than hope. The first few clips were usual. Deer at dawn, a fox at dusk, raccoons inspecting the enclosure fence. Then he saw the timestamp, 11:47 p.m. The night before. He pressed play. The bobcat stepped into frame, bigger now, coat gleaming in the infrared light. He moved with the confidence of something that belonged to the wild, head high, shoulders rolling with each step. He paused at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the enclosure, and turned toward the house. For 5 long seconds, he just stood there, watching. Then faint on the audio, David heard it, a meow, soft, familiar. Then another, answering from the porch. David's breath caught. He rewound the clip, listened again. There was no mistaking it. Milo, calling from inside the house, and the bobcat responding from the woods. That night, David opened the back door. Milo walked out onto the porch, ears forward, tail low. He sat, waited, and from the tree line, the bobcat emerged. He didn't come all the way. He stopped 10 feet out, just beyond the light, but it was close enough. Milo stepped down from the porch, walked slowly across the grass. The bobcat lowered his head, and they touched noses, brief, gentle, certain. Then the bobcat turned and slipped back into the shadows. Milo watched him go, then turned and walked back to David, winding between his legs with a purr that sounded, for the first time in weeks, like contentment. David looked out at the dark trees. The bobcat had stayed only one night, but he'd left a bond that would last a lifetime.